Larry Davis. His name still carries weight on the streets of New York. His life wasn't just a typical tale of crime. It's a story of systemic corruption, betrayal, and a violent shootout that captured national attention. So, who was Larry Davis, and why does his story still make waves in criminal history? Let's take a closer look at his rise, his fall, and how he became a legend in the world of crime. The early years, a broken childhood in the Bronx. Born in 1966 in the Bronx, New York, Larry Davis came into the world surrounded by challenges. Raised in a large family, his life started off with adversity. His father walked out when Davis was just 10 years old, leaving his mother, an incredibly religious woman, to raise him and his siblings on her own. Despite her best efforts, life in the Bronx wasn't kind. The city was in the grips of the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s, and the streets were as dangerous as they were tempting. As a kid, Davis wasn't just interested in the violence that surrounded him. He had a passion for music and mechanics, dreams of something beyond the chaos of the city, but the streets had other plans. At the age of 14, Davis dropped out of school and quickly got lured into a life of crime. It was an era when drugs flooded the streets and police corruption was rampant. For a young, impressionable teenager, the temptation to dive into the underworld was overwhelming. It wasn't long before Davis's path was set, and it was a violent one. Getting involved, the drug trade and corrupt cops. Larry Davis didn't just become a street dealer, he became a pawn in a much larger and more dangerous game. By the mid-80s, drugs were everywhere in New York City, especially in the Bronx. Davis, like many others, fell prey to the temptation of fast money. But what made his story different wasn't just his involvement with drugs, it was the fact that he got tangled up with the very people who were supposed to protect him, the police. This wasn't your average cop on the beat trying to stop crime. No. These were corrupt officers who saw Davis as a tool to further their own criminal schemes. They used him to sell drugs and, in return, took a significant cut of his earnings. Davis wasn't just working for the cops, he was being exploited by them. It was a dirty deal, one where the lines between right and wrong were blurred, and trust was nowhere to be found. As Davis got deeper into the world of crime, the violence surrounding him escalated. Drug dealing was never a clean business, and the stakes kept getting higher. But it wasn't just the dealers or rival gangs he had to worry about. It was the very police officers he had trusted, the ones who were supposed to be on his side. It was clear the system was failing him, and it was time for him to take matters into his own hands. The breaking point, a tragedy that changed everything. For Davis, everything changed when his girlfriend tragically lost their baby. A loss that was ultimately linked to drug use. But the real gut punch came when Davis dug deeper into the situation and discovered something that shocked him to his core. One of the corrupt officers he had been working with was directly responsible for supplying the drugs that led to this tragedy. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The people he had been working for, the ones who were supposed to uphold the law, were the ones who helped bring about the death of his child. This betrayal was the breaking point. For anyone, the loss of a child is devastating. But for Davis, it wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a wake-up call. The same officers who had been manipulating him for years had contributed to the worst moment of his life. He wasn't just angry, he was enraged. This wasn't a man anymore who was just looking to survive. This was a man who was ready to fight back. The shootout, a day of blood and chaos. It was just another day in the life of Larry Davis, except it wasn't. He had been living in the shadows for weeks, trying to outrun the chaos that had become his life. But on November 19th, everything came crashing down. Davis had been hiding out in his sister's apartment in the Bronx when 7 police officers showed up to arrest him. Now, most people in his situation would have either surrendered or tried to flee, but not Davis. He wasn't about to go down quietly. Instead, he fought for his life. The apartment turned into a war zone as Davis managed to get the drop on the officers, wounding 6 of them in the process. The whole thing was a blur of bullets, chaos, and blood. Davis wasn't just trying to escape, he was trying to survive. And survive, he did. In the blink of an eye, He had turned what should have been an easy arrest into a violent standoff, and in the end, he walked away. Yes, you heard that right, he walked away. Against all odds, Davis managed to escape, leaving the police in his wake. How did he pull it off? Some people said it was sheer luck, others pointed to divine intervention. But whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Larry Davis had just become the most wanted man in America. He wasn't just any criminal now. He was a symbol of defiance, a guy who managed to shoot 6 cops and still get away. This wasn't just a getaway, it was a message, and the message was loud and clear. Larry Davis wasn't going down without a fight. The hunt, on the run. Now, this is where things get interesting. After the dust settled and Davis made his miraculous escape, the city of New York went into full panic mode. The hunt for him was on, and it was intense. The man who had just shot 6 officers and managed to escape was now a legend in the making. Davis wasn't just a criminal to the public, he was an icon. Everyone wanted to know who he was, what he was about, and, most importantly, where he was hiding. The manhunt that ensued wasn't just any manhunt, it was one for the ages. Cops were scouring the city, putting up roadblocks, searching every corner of the Bronx, hoping to catch a break. But Davis was elusive. He was living proof that sometimes criminals know the system better than those who enforce it. He was able to slip through the cracks, disappearing into the city like a ghost. The longer he stayed hidden, the more his legend grew. For Davis, it was a time of survival. He knew the walls were closing in, and sooner or later, the authorities would catch up with him. But in that moment, he was free, at least for now. He wasn't just running from the law, he was running from the very people who had exploited him, the corrupt cops who had used him as a pawn. This wasn't just about getting away from a shootout, this was about escaping a broken system. Davis's time on the run was filled with tension, as he knew the capture was only a matter of time. But even so, he remained one step ahead, constantly moving, evading the grasp of law enforcement. He had become something bigger than just a fugitive. He was the embodiment of defiance against a system that had failed him. The end of the chase, a new chapter. After weeks of evading capture, the inevitable finally happened in December 1986. Davis was caught. The man who had managed to shoot 6 officers and slip away from the cops for so long was finally brought to justice. But what happened next wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter in his troubled life. The capture of Larry Davis wasn't just another criminal getting caught, it was the end of an incredible tale of survival and defiance. It raised questions about police corruption, about a system that failed to protect the very people it was supposed to serve. Davis's life, filled with violence, betrayal, and manipulation, became a symbol of the chaos that defined the Bronx in the 1980s. Larry Davis's name is still remembered today, not just for his violent shootout with the police, but for what it represented. It's a reminder of a time when the lines between right and wrong were blurred, when survival meant fighting back, and when the system itself became the enemy. His story, a day of blood and chaos, forever changed the way people saw the relationship between the law and the criminals it was supposed to control. And whether you see him as a criminal or a hero, one thing is for sure, Larry Davis's story will never be forgotten. Thanks for watching. Please like the video, press the subscribe button, and also drop your thoughts in the comments section.